السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. هل باتت العنصرية تمزق نسيج المجتمع الأمريكي اليوم أكثر من ذي قبل؟ ولماذا في 2015 تدار الأذن الصماء للشباب الأمريكيين من أصول أفريقية بل ويقتلون بوحشية ومن دون عقاب؟ شبح العنصرية وسيطرته على المجتمع الأمريكي اليوم من الداخل. معكم زينب الصفار، تابعونا. بينما العالم يشاهد بترقب الاضطرابات التي تتفاقم في شوارع بلدات عدة في أكثر من ولاية في أمريكا على خلفية عنصرية، تدق كلمات مارتن لوثر كينغ: الشغب هو لغة غير المسموعين، هو جرس ينذر بتعالي الصيحات الرافضة للظلم. في كل مرة يتحدث الناس فيها عن السلم الاجتماعي يقصدون أن هناك قمة وقاعا، والناس ذو البشرة السوداء لطالما انتهى بهم المطاف في القاع. هي مقولة أسات شكور، أول امرأة يدرج اسمها في قائمة أهم الإرهابيين لدى مكتب التحقيقات الفيدرالي، وثاني مواطن أمريكي في هذه القائمة منذ أيار مايو 2013. أساتا واسمها الحقيقي جوان ديبرا بايرن، كانت عضوا في حزب الفهود السود، وهو حركة حقوقية لسود الولايات المتحدة نشأت بعد مقتل مالكوم إكس، لتصبح أساتا بعد إذن عضوا في جيش التحرير الأسود. اتهمت أساتا بقتل شرطي عام 1973 في ولاية نيو جيرسي، ولكنها نفت التهمة الموجهة إليها. تمكنت من الهرب من سجن أمريكي عام 1979، ومذ ذاك لا تزال هاربة، حيث توجهت إلى كوبا عام 1984 وما زالت تعيش هناك حتى الآن. أساتا سيرة ذاتية، كتاب نشرته أساتا في كوبا، وهو يوثق تسلسل أحداث قصة اعتقالها وسجنها وصراعها القانوني اليائس ضد التهم التي وجهت إليها، ونشأتها وطرق معاملتها بتطرف من قبل مجتمع استغلالي عنصري، إضافة إلى الطريقة التي أبقيت فيها في سجن انفرادي وكيفية تعذيبها. أساتا تعبر في هذا الكتاب أيضا عن الاضطهاد في حياتها الذي عاشته في ظل عنصرية طبقية وعرقية وجنسية. تخبرنا أساتا أيضا عن النضال من أجل إسقاط النظام العنصري الأمريكي، وليس فقط عن محاولة دمج الناس ذوي البشرة السوداء فيه. هو كتاب يشرح لماذا العنصرية مستمرة كقضية مركزية في السياسة الأمريكية، حيث اشتعال الشرارات اليوم في بولتيمور وغير مكان في أمريكا يؤكد ذلك. Lily, Lament, activist and organizer in Fist Fight Imperialism Stand Together, and a journalist from North Carolina in the US. Welcome to the Inside, sir.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure, sir. Well, John White, writer and commentator specializing in geopolitics, said in the wake of the Ferguson incident, quote, "The social unrest that has engulfed the small town of Ferguson in Missouri in the United States in the wake of the killing of an unarmed black teenager, or African-American teenager as we like to call him, Michael Brown, by a white police officer, is as predictable as it is horrific." Why would such an incident be that predictable?
Unfortunately, the execution and the killings of black bodies is not something that is new. It's been going on for centuries in various forms, in various capacities. So, you know, it's something that, unfortunately, in the U.S., you know, happens quite often. As far as it being horrific, you know, it is horrific. You know, a teenager was shot and killed in the street in his own neighborhood. Really unjustifiable. You know, with no justification for doing that. So.
And there was also no indictment. You know, this adds to the issue that there was no indictment of the police officer who was responsible for this action. However, you know, as the corporate media has shown, that they dealt with the issue of the protesters who protested the unindictment of the police officer this was really shown in the media more than the incident?
The indictment or the non-indictment of Officer Darren Wilson, again, that's something that we expect. Honestly, the protesters and demonstrators and activists who've been working in Ferguson and who've been deeply engaged in the struggle against police brutality and state repression, we didn't expect it. We hoped for an indictment, but honestly, we did not expect an indictment. We did not expect justice because, again, this is a system that really has never granted us justice. And we've always had to push the envelope and fight and resist and rebel as hard as we could to even get, you know, a little smidget of justice.
Right. You know, such incidents, you said that this is not the first time. Of course, it's not the first time. But, you know, such kind of incidents and cases and killings, they were never reported in the media, or they were slightly reported in some local media outlets, but not in the worldwide or corporate media, the mainstream media. Why?
I guess I'll begin with how this got out to the media.
Right.
Because you are correct. Corporate media and mainstream media did not cover this case until social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram had blasted it all throughout the world. So for the first 2 days, you didn't see it on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. It was totally quiet. But, you know, under the
spread of the
that's
information
That's right.
Yes, across the social media networks.
Yes, social media.
And this, again, you know, Lily, it refutes more than any amount of academic research ever could the notion that words such as justice, freedom, and democracy represent the reality of what is going on in the U.S. For a country that has been long been preaching democracy and such kind of values. The way it treats its own citizens.
Well, the United States preaches democracy, but it's actually hypocrisy in real life for many, many oppressed nations. And it's funny, we kind of laugh at the notion of the U.S. spreading democracy out throughout the world when you haven't even, you know, practiced democracy right here in your own backyard.
True. Allow me here to go to certain kind of statistics published by the FBI in 2012. They say, and according to them, to their reports, black people, and this is not how we like to call them, the African Americans or Afro-Americans, constituted 51.1% of homicide victims and 53.4% of homicide offenders. An inordinate number when you consider that blacks make up just 13% of the total population. Further, a white police officer killed a black person on average twice a week in the United States. And again, these are FBI reports over a 7 period up to 2012. Why does racism continue to poison social relations in the U.S. today?
Well, honestly, you know, the U.S. was founded on was founded on racism. It was founded on the oppression and the genocide of not only the Afro-American but also on the backs of the indigenous people. So the fact that racism, you know, is still very prevalent and affects the social fabric, again, it's not a surprise because that's the very foundation of, you know, of how this country came into existence.
Some people have been asking questions whether the African Americans are considered enemies in the police departments. Is this the case? Is this really the case, or this is a much exaggerated scenario?
It's funny, you mentioned the media a couple of questions back, and you know this question now, and I would best answer that with a quote from Malcolm X, better known as El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. And he made a statement one time that says, if you're not careful, the media will have you hating the victim, and it will make the oppressor, you know, look like the oppressed. And that's often the case with whether it be the Afro-American community in the U.S., whether it be Ferguson, whether it be Palestinians, whether it be Hamas. You know, you make the people who are resisting the oppression look like the oppressors.
True.
And again, you know, the corporate media. It also serves the interest of, you know, white supremacy, of racism, of preserving poverty and social class. So again, all of these things are interwoven, and there's an intersection, you know, with all of these issues. So.
Do you agree then that the fabric of the American society today is torn apart by racism?
Very much so. Very much so. Very much so. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful, but realistically, I doubt that the U.S. will ever solve its race problem. And I'm just being honest, you know, when I say that.
Why did we start hearing about the incidents? Is it because of the social media, as you said? Why now, for example?
Great question, and you kind of hinted to it already. Social media. Before, you know, our iPhones had video cameras and cameras on them, you know, local police departments in the U.S. got away with this. It wasn't documented. If you depended on the Civilian Review Board or Internal Affairs to properly, you know, inform the people of injustices conducted by the police, you weren't going to be properly informed. Now the people have taken power in their own hands to become reporters and to become journalists and to disseminate the truth to the people, not only to the people in the U.S., but to the people throughout the world, to the masses, to the oppressed.
So this case, this plight of the Afro-Americans dates back decades and decades centuries ago. And, you know, with the coming of the first Afro-American president, Barack Obama, to power in 2008, despite of this fact, he couldn't, you know, hold the problem and arrest it and try to find a solution for it. It exacerbated, and now we see it more in the media even. So
it was unfortunate because in 2008, many Afro-Americans, particularly the youth, the oppressed youth, from the Afro-American community, were very hopeful, volunteered their time, worked on this campaign, and then last year in 2014, you know, you see this this rumbling of oppressed Afro-American youth because of, you know, systemic repression, the police brutality, the excessive force, the racial profiling. And when Michael Brown happened, when Eric Garner, and I've got to share a little brief synopsis on that, when it happened, he didn't even really speak to it directly. He spoke around it. You know, he invited the organizers there in Ferguson to come and speak, you know, to him personally, but he did not address the actual issue itself directly. He did not come to, you know, to Ferguson and speak to the people and really share with their struggle. So, you know, the youth there even feels some animosity toward that too.
Right.
You know?
Right. Lily, allow us to stop now for a short break. Then after the break, we will discuss more how this killings and this, you know, attacks against the Afro-Americans gets outside the U.S. border into other countries, maybe Latin American countries and other countries abroad. But after the break, إذن فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. المدافع العالمي عن حقوق الإنسان والمخضرم في حركة التحرير الأسود أجام برأيه يقول: وهكذا عندما يقاوم الفلسطينيون سرقة أرضهم وقتلهم على يد المستعمرين الإسرائيليين، فإن رد فعلهم يصنف على أنه عنف غير شرعي، الأمر الذي يبعث على دعم حق إسرائيل في الدفاع عن نفسها. عندما أطلق الأفارقة نضالهم التحرري الوطني لتحرير أنفسهم من السيطرة الاستعمارية الأوروبية في أماكن مثل كينيا وأنغولا وموزمبيق وزيمبابوي وجنوب أفريقيا، أدان الغرب مجددا جهودهم بكونها غير شرعية علاوة على ذلك، لأن هذه النضالات كان مقررا لها في أن تكون غير شرعية، وجدت القوى الاستعمارية مسوغا لها في أن تهاجم تلك الجهود بشراسة بدعم من حكومة الولايات المتحدة. وعندما نظم الاميركيون الأفارقة أنفسهم ضد عنف الشرطة ولأجل تقرير المصير، اعتبرت جهودنا غير شرعية. جرى قمعنا بوحشية بمجموعة كاملة من تكتيكات إرهاب الدولة، متضمنة الضرب والقتل والاختراق والمراقبة وسجن النشطاء طوال عقود. الصحفي من ولاية نورث كارولاينا لامونت ليلي ومن منظمي حركة مكافحة الإمبريالية والوقوف جنبا إلى جنب، كيف يقرأ هذا المشهد المهيمن اليوم؟
Brother Jamu is right on point, very accurate. You know, when the bullets, when the tanks, when the tear gas, when the repression is on our backs, it's valid for some reason, or there is some reason that is created to make it valid. When those same tanks or tear gas or resistance in different forms, when it is given back to the oppressor, when it is given back to the colonial powers, then there's an issue. But you know, Afro-Americans have been resisting for centuries in many, many forms. Some of them have been directly through arms, and some of them have been in other creative ways. And you know, to be very brutally honest, you know, Africans, my descendants and ancestors were brought here to work. We were brought here to work for free. We were not brought here to become citizens. We were not brought here to gain equality. We were not really brought here to be active participants within the society. That was never the intent. You know, our humanity eventually kind of rose off the plantation and out of the depths of oppression, and began to, you know, demand that we be recognized as full humans. And so I think what we're seeing here is nothing but the continued devaluation of, for lack of a better term, black life in the United States, which is why someone like an officer, Darren Wilson, is not indicted, which is why...
Complete impunity.
Complete impunity, that is correct.
Right.
Which is why police officers, or for that matter, those who don't even have a badge, we call them vigilantes. That's how that they can, you know,
especially in
kill,
the wake,
get away with it.
Lamont, in the wake of you know, Washington engineering attacks against sovereign states under the pretext of human rights violations, and then they cannot find a solution for the plight of the African Americans up till now, up till today, with you know, according to certain database that says that every 22 or 28 hours an African American young man is being killed. Now, John W. Whitehead, human rights attorney.
If I could, let me go back to your question. And it's good to be here. It's good to be here and hear the various different struggles, whether it be from Palestinians, whether it be from the Syrians, or whether it be from Lebanese. Because for so long, you know, we saw our struggle as an isolated struggle within the world framework. We saw our struggle as a civil rights struggle. It wasn't until Malcolm X, you know, really brought the notion of, no, this is not a civil rights struggle. This is a human rights struggle. This, you know, this isn't just an American problem. It's a global and international problem. And all of these various different nations are suffering the same ills and the same effects of colonialism and imperialism.
So you agree here that there has to be a kind of building of coalition, you know, of the oppressed peoples from the U.S. to Latin America to the Arab world to Africa and North Africa, countries everywhere, in order, you know, to try and find a collective solution for not being oppressed anymore.
That is correct. That is correct. And I'll speak very boldly when I say, you know, we must get rid of the system of capitalism and replace it with socialism. You know, we must get rid of those who sit in the seats of politicians and senators and mayors, those who hold on to this racist premise we must get rid of them and replace them with those who will serve the needs of the people.
Let me just go back to what John Whitehead, the human rights attorney, said, very important, that remember that in the wake of the shooting, Ferguson police officers clad in body armor, their faces covered with masks, equipped with assault rifles and snipers, and riding armored vehicles, showed up in force to deal with protesters. It's as if the police, who is supposed to protect his own citizens, is there to face an enemy.
They were. They were. The same tanks, that are used in Gaza, the same assault rifles were also brought to Ferguson.
Right.
With unarmed, innocent protesters, men, women, children, and unleashed hell.
And again, the corporate media helped with this. They stood by the side of the police, that those people were facing those, brutal and, those kind of protesters. They forgot about the issue of why the protesters are in the squares and on the streets.
That is correct. They call them rioters, and looters, without examining the actual cause, without examining the systemic underbelly of why that even happened.
Right. This kind of treatment of African Americans, it just, goes extra or past the borders of the U.S. On December 20th in 1989, George Bush, the father, ordered the most powerful military in the world to descend on poor black communities in the middle of Panama City and carry out one of the most brutal war crimes of the late 20th century. And according to observers, the black lives taken by the murderous assault on Panama 26 years ago should be a sober reminder that U.S. state violence is not confined to ghettos and barrios of the U.S., but is a central component of the racist, colonial, capitalist project that is the U.S. Do you agree with this?
I agree 100%. Unfortunately, I have to admit to you that, I was in the U.S. Army myself for 4 years. My father served in the U.S. Army for 24 years. It wasn't until after I got out of the military and began to examine some of these social issues, political issues for myself, that I saw that, wow, myself and my father were nothing but instruments to perpetuate, colonialism and imperialism. Now I use that same energy, to fight for the people and to raise consciousness. Domestically, we call them police officers, sheriff's departments, we call them the FBI, or, internationally, they're called the Marines, Special Forces, the CIA. But ultimately, they operate under the same umbrella. And again, you see this commonality of dark people all over the world. I'm wearing a button today, that says Muslim Lives Matter. And this was put on by the Youth Assembly. There's been a connection in the U.S. Again, you have this merger and this coming together of Black Lives Matter and now Muslim Lives Matter, and talking about, this intersection of mutual oppression.
Now, the experience of Ferguson has demonstrated, actually, Lamont, to people around the world that African Americans are finally awaking from an almost 2 decades of long sleep, and in the process of reawakening the spirit of resistance for everyone. Lamont Lilly, activist and organizer of Fist Fight Imperialism Stand Together, and journalist from North Carolina and the U.S. Many thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure, sir. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل. من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.